Hi everybody. Garbaugust is coming. Hooray! My favorite time of the year. And I've been reading a few things and I've got a few things kind of lined up. But what I want to talk to you about today is the wonderful books that I remember from when I was a child and a teenager that were adapted into made-for-TV miniseries. Now, the made-for-TV miniseries, looking back on it, was just such a tremendously, I mean, it just felt so mindlessly trashy entertainment. And they were always so hyped, you know. They weren't just a TV movie or a TV miniseries. They were an event, a television event. And I remember back in mostly in the 80s when I was a kid, I remember a lot of the shows that we would watch on TV that have been adapted into miniseries were books that were on my mother's shelf, right? So that's what I want to talk about, is just some of the really good adaptations that I remember from when I was a kid. So we're going to look at, there are some in the 70s, some in the 80s, some in the, not mostly in the 80s, but also early 90s. And I'm going to try to stick to the ones that I've actually read. And I'm going to put links in the doobly-doo where I found them on YouTube. So some of these miniseries you can actually watch on YouTube. So that's fun. Now the reason I'm talking about that is that on the recommendations or suggestions for reading for Garbaugust week 4 is novelizations or books that have been adapted into 70s, 80s TV miniseries. So, and I'll throw 90s in there as well. Why not? All right. So I kind of went through and I just kind of thought about things that were a television event. So the first some of the most wonderful TV miniseries were adapted from Jackie Collins novels. Now, oh, and one thing I will also caution is, if you are going to read some of these novels, be sure you start now, because a lot of them are north of 600 pages, and that's one of the drawbacks to reading them for Garbaugust. But the miniseries usually run between 4 and 8 hours, so you'll have some fun watching those as well. So the first one, Jackie Collins, the two that I found were Lucky Chances, which I think is, I thought it was so stupid when it came out, because Chances and Lucky were two different books, but they compressed the story together so that they could tell it all in one miniseries. But that is on YouTube, and I'll put the link in the doobly-doo. And then another one, which is as 80s can be, from the whiny, ridiculous synthesized soundtrack, to the giant hair and shoulder pads, to the incredibly shiny, glitzy, star-studded, so to speak, cast. Hollywood Wives is a fantastically 80s cheesy adaptation of a very trashy book. They made a TV movie out of Lady Boss as well, which I have not been able to find on YouTube. I found it and then it seems to have disappeared. So some of these also, they're there and then they get taken down for copyright. The next one that I want to suggest, now Sidney Sheldon is another name that was fantastic. He writes great trashy books. One of the things that, and I think I've said this before, one of the things that I find drives a trashy novel, or a Garbaugust novel that we like, is that they're very, very plot driven and there isn't a whole lot of character development. So there were quite a few actually adaptations of Sidney Sheldon novels, but one that was a big one and a television event is Master the Game, and you can find it here on YouTube. Oh, you know what? I suppose I should tell us just a little bit about the stories too. Jackie Collins, Lucky Chances is the story of Gino Santangelo and his, his rise through the mafia. Well, a watered down version of the mafia, and then his daughter, he builds hotels in Vegas, and his daughter takes over, and she's a really savvy businesswoman, and it's their lives and their loves and everything. And Hollywood Wives is about the idle rich of the wives of men who work in the film industry, and again their lives and their loves and their triangles and all of the drama. So anyway, Master of the Game is about a young man who goes to South Africa in the late 1800s, and he wants to get working in the diamond mining industry, and through a series of events builds a fortune, and his daughter inherits his fortune, and she becomes this very strong business mogul. Another one that I have not been able to find on YouTube, but I would recommend definitely to read it, is If Tomorrow Comes. It's about a young woman who, through again a contrived series of misfortunes, goes to jail, gets pardoned, and when she comes out she becomes a criminal. And it's a great story. Another thing about kind of trashy TV miniseries is true crime books. Now, there's a wealth of true crime that has been adapted into TV movies, TV miniseries, and one of these is Small Sacrifices, which is the story of Diane Downs, who, she was a horrible woman. She had these kids, and then she met a new guy, and then she decided to murder her kids and blame it on, those guys over there. So it said to her she was carjacked, but one of her kids lived and turned her in. So, I mean, just horrible woman. And the Small Sacrifices film starred Farrah Fawcett. Now, this is when she took a turn in the 80s into becoming a more serious actress, but there was still something kind of small screen, trash watching about the films she was in. She put in fantastic performances. I'm not gonna, disparage that. And I will also make an honorable mention of The Burning Bed, which is a film, a TV movie, not a miniseries. And I think it was one of her first dramatic film roles. And sorry, my neighbors just come out to read a book. I don't want to disturb her while I'm talking here. So The Burning Bed is the story of a woman who gets involved with a guy, and at first he's all lovey-dovey, but then he becomes abusive, and she puts up with many, many years of abuse until finally she just has enough one night, and she throws gasoline on his bed while he's passed out drunk and lights a match. And the TV movie takes place around the trial, the hearing. That movie is on Tubi right now, and I have seen it on YouTube, so you might be able to find it. I haven't been able to find it on YouTube, but if I can find it, I'll put the link. And let's see here. Another one I would recommend. Now, Stephen King, of course, has been adapted many, many times into movies, lots of TV miniseries to greater or lesser, success. But one of the most successful and one of the best adaptations, in my opinion, is the 1994 version of The Stand. Now, The Stand, of course, is the story of everybody dies of the flu, and the survivors end up in this kind of good versus evil fight. And now the 1994 version has also just been re-released onto Blu-ray and remastered, but you can find it on YouTube. And again, I'll put the link in the doobly-doo. And I'd say that the 1994 version, which is kind of interesting, it is in line, it's a little bit more of an adaptation of the original version of The Stand, which was released in 1977, I think. And when in 1994, of course, there was the expanded version of The Stand, which the 2020 release, that the series that they did on Prime, which you can, I think it's still up there. I haven't seen it not there, or not Prime, sorry, CBS. I think it's on Paramount. Or is it on Prime? I can't remember. It's still out there on streaming anyway. So the 2020 version is a lot closer to the expanded version of The Stand. So you get, so different scenes are included that were not included in the 1994 original version. So it's kind of weird to explain if you're not familiar with the story. But another TV miniseries which I haven't been able to find, actually there are two, but they were pretty good Stephen King adaptations as far as the miniseries version goes, is the 1997 version of The Shining. I'm sorry, it's not as good as the Kubrick film, of course, but I have a soft spot for it. And I will also recommend the if you can find it. I was not able to find it. The 1979 version of Salem's Lot, which was a mini-series, 2-part film, and features some very scary scenes. If you know the scenes I'm talking about, you know. All right, now, in doing my research, some other names that came up that I thought were just brought back so many memories. Judith Krantz. There's one called I'll Take Manhattan. I think that one's on YouTube. One that I never, I thought about trying to find the book, but the book even is hard to find. Poor Little Rich Girl, the Barbara Hutton story, which is the story of a woman who was like a multimillionaire. But it's one of those things that I remember my mother watching in the 80s, and it is on YouTube. John Jakes wrote a book called The Bastard, and it's got this guy in this like colonial, the 3/4 hat, and he's like pointing. And that book was on my mother's bookshelf for my entire childhood. The miniseries is on YouTube. It makes me laugh. Another one that I recall very fondly was Lace. Can't remember the author's name, but there's this fantastic, one of the best lines ever uttered on TV. Phoebe Cates, she gets these women in a room and she goes, "Which one of you bitches is my mother?" And another adaptation that I remember I only vaguely remember it because I was pretty little when it came out, but I do remember my mother watching Roots, and I read the book, and the book, by the way, is fantastic, by Alex Haley. Highly recommend as a read. And then my personal favorite, very specific subgenre, TV adaptations that starred Richard Chamberlain. And Shogun by James Clavell, or pretty much anything by James Clavell, by the way. A lot of his books were adapted into miniseries. And they have redone Shogun, and that's on Prime, I think? Or is it Disney? I can't remember. My sister watched it, but I haven't seen it yet. And he was also in what's considered one of the all-time great TV miniseries, The Thornbirds. Now, unfortunately, that one is not on YouTube, and I have not been able to find it anywhere. But if you can track it down, definitely worth a watch. And he was also the first Jason Bourne. Bourne Identity, I think, is the first book. Or is it Bourne Supremacy? I don't know. But the first book was adapted in 1982, and he was the very first Jason Bourne, even before Matt Damon. So that's a little bit of a rundown of what I remember as television events from the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s. Highly recommended. Hope you're reading lots of horror. Have a great day.